Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the Beyond Fulfillment Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Goulas, and this week, my guest is the owner and the principal of JHL Solutions, Juli Lassow. Welcome, Julie.
Dave, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time. If you could, for everybody, can you walk us through what JHL Solutions is and how it came to be?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, JHL Solutions is a retail consultancy. I work with mostly retailers, primarily retailers and their supplier partners to build amazing products, often own brand or private label, by really deepening their partnerships and bringing the most value to those customers. So, as they find those products on their virtual or digital shelves, they are delighted.
Okay.
To tell you
And
a little bit more about what that looks and feels like as well and how we came to be.
Sure. Yeah. And I was looking at your history. So you have a lot of experience in mass retail.
Mhm.
You're with Target for quite a long time.
I was. So Target is where I started my career. I spent my entire professional career in retail. At Target, I really focused on merchandising and merchandising adjacent roles. So inventory planning, buying, finance, and I also did a fair amount of negotiations, but more than half of my time at Target was spent in their own brand sourcing area. So Target has both a consolidated buying and a consolidated sourcing team. So I had the great fortune of working with several teams to build out sourcing matrix group of vendors that we worked with to bring own brand products to the shelves, both the teams locally and then also there's a global team initiative as well across some of the businesses that I supported. So I got to know a lot of really fantastic global team members and global sourcing partners that ended up being part of those business models and really definitely key to the success that those businesses saw. And not many people retire from any mass retailer after 40 or 50 years. And so I always knew I'd have a second or third chapter in my career. And what I looked to do when I stepped outside of Target and launched my consultancy was really focus on how do I deepen those supplier partnerships. That was the part of my job in sourcing I love the most. So in addition to finding the right partners, bringing them along the development process, but then also negotiating with them were all key parts of bringing that maximized value to the shelves. And so that's what I focused on as I stepped outside the organization half a dozen years ago.
Okay. And why do you think too? Because that seems like a common theme in terms of like the mass retail sector having challenges finding the right partners and really, getting the right suppliers and having those long-term relationships that work for both sides. So why do you think that's such a challenge for them?
That's a great question because I think that the answer is it depends. And those challenges come from a variety of different questions or in situations. So they can be external. So as we navigated the immediate repercussions and fallout from COVID-19 and the world shutting down, there's business partners and partnerships that changed dramatically. They either went out of business or they deprioritized certain partnerships. So certain partnerships got much stronger, but many just broke apart completely. And that obviously was a massive challenge as business models changed and those partnerships needed to be rebuilt. That was a lot of the conversations I was having with my clients and their partners of who and how do we want to rebuild with. There's also challenges that are more internally focused. So if a retailer is highly strategic, chooses to communicate those strategies very clearly to their partners, and is very thoughtful about which partners they invite to work with or the partnerships that they decide to pursue, those partnerships often tend to be very strong. But I've seen many partnerships either don't not ever really get started in a meaningful way or fall apart if the partners aren't transparent about what their priorities are. They aren't transparent about how they're able to work together best. So those are the balances that I like to strike when I'm working with my clients, is thinking through what are the external and the internal implications when it comes to building those strong partnerships, because those challenges come from many different directions.
Yeah, for sure. And one that I've heard too, even from other small business owners and brands, like on the other side dealing with mass
Mhm.
retail, is there's almost this reluctance to kind of go through based on like the terms or the pricing
Mhm.
or the chargebacks. So and you being like an instrumental part, like in the middle, like how do you help like the brand side and the small business side kind of navigate what it's really like doing business with mass retail?
Yeah, it's an incredibly important part of the conversation that both parties need to know who they're stepping into the conversation with. So for mass retailers or even any retailer partner, knowing what their priorities are, and as I mentioned a moment ago, what their strategies and expectations are. But equally importantly, is for the supplier and the manufacturer and the brand partners to understand, are we a good fit? So I think that starts at a few different places. The place I'd recommend starting is thinking through who the target customers are. Do you have aligned target customers? Is what you're offering something that's important or core to that retailer's priority? So is there a good product and strategy alignment overall? And then size and scope and scale. So how big is this retailer? How big is this partner? If everything succeeded as we were hoping to and we get full placement, are we able to support that and be able to meet the expectations for replenishment? Are we able to meet the expectations for performance and quality? And how well do you understand those expectations? So like a Whole Foods is going to look very, very different than a really basic grocer, regional grocer, for example. And if you are in the food space and you're more of a startup, there's more of a niche that you could probably find some purchase at a Whole Foods, and that you might not be the top priority for a more basic grocery store. And then the last piece that you touched on from a financial perspective is incredibly important. So what are you able to understand about the expectations of working with a retailer depending on their size and scope? Is it chargebacks? Is it free fill? Is it being part of branding campaigns and paying marketing or packaging? And that's all an incredibly important piece to understand after you have that bigger picture alignment in my mind around product fit and market fit. But incredibly important before you get too far down the road that you understand what financial expectations are, not only for those cost of goods, but the everything else, whether that's chargebacks or fill, et cetera.
Okay. And another thing too that retail is always dealing with is the e-commerce
Mm-hmm.
competition, and like let's just like
Absolutely.
Amazon, for instance, right? And all the online.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen a lot of numbers indicate that retail's bounced back in a big way, in the recent years
Yeah.
post-COVID and kind of as things, normalize more. So where do you see the state of brick and mortar retail today in this market?
Well, I think the most progressive and forward-thinking retailers and brands are thinking about retail in a very unified perspective. So there's a reason to be, regardless of how a consumer is showing up to shop, because there's, depending on your consumer base, there's a variety of different ways they can engage with you. So for brick and mortar to continue to be relevant, that's about a shopper who's looking for an experience. They want a high touch service based on what the product might be that they're shopping for. So if you're shopping for a car, there are people who are always going to want to shop for a car in person or try on a dress or shoes, etc. Um, and this will also vary by demographics. So people of a certain age and disposition are going to want to have an in-store experience where they can be taken through that decision-making process, either by having the product physically in front of them or having a very well-educated, well-informed store associate help them do that. There's certain generations and certain product categories that just don't lend themselves as much to that high touch experience. So that's where you start to see like really easy list building type, really simple replenishment grocery items, everyday basics that you can find on Amazon. And you're increasingly seeing those really simple shopping behaviors where it is much lower touch. It's all about speed, cost, convenience. They'll naturally lend themselves well to an online marketplace versus an in-store brick and mortar experience.
Okay. And switching gears here, so you've had the consultancy since 2017, is that right?
Yeah, it is. You've done your research.
So what made you decide at that point to go out on your own and really kind of focus on this niche that you have for the mass retail slash supplier
Mhm.
partnerships?
Well, something that I mentioned earlier, it was really the initial kernel that I knew I wasn't going to retire from Target. So something that was important to me was thinking about where do I think I'm going to have the greatest amount of impact in the work that I love to do. And I was fortunate during my career at Target to be able to work in a variety of different merchandising businesses and organizations. And I found that I really loved that partnership conversation about creating as much value as possible, finding ways to bring things to life, to solve problems. And so when I stood back and thought about what does my next chapter look like, I was open to the idea of what a job would be, but I couldn't put a finger on it and really name it. I wasn't a logistics provider. I wasn't an accountant. And so it made it difficult to think about what would that role be. And so for lack of a more clear alternative, I decided that I'd pursue consulting because I could really focus on the value and the impact I wanted to deliver. I didn't have to worry so much about putting a label on it, but I could think about who are the clients that I wanted to support and what value did I want to bring forward in their organizations. So I liked the flexibility of that. And that's really served me well, and it's allowed me to focus and refine in the years since I've launched my business around the type of work I like to do and the type of teams I like to work with, which I also really appreciated after working in the structure of a corporate space. Having that freedom to think through and pursue where I felt like I could have the most impact was really fantastic and highly motivating for me when I thought about launching a consultancy versus finding another job.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Right. And like you said, you had the experience to do it. You had a lot of firsthand knowledge. And then I'm just looking here at some of the other um, names you had on your website, like assume other customers like CVS and Petco and Giant Eagle. So I mean, big brands, obviously. What's it like dealing with companies like that in a sales cycle where you know that it's uh, there's a lot of bureaucracy there versus a smaller account?
Well, what I found when I matched my skill set and experience up to the clients where I could offer the most value was that I grew up in a matrixed organization. I grew up enterprise level from a work perspective. So that was a skill set that I had. I wasn't as interested or easily able to translate working at a Fortune 50 company down to helping a startup really easy get off the ground. So for me, part of deciding who I wanted to focus on is where I could have the best impact. And it really did stay in that mass and specialty area. So for me, knowing the clients that I love to serve and the teams I love to work with, that kind of came part and parcel with understanding and being able to navigate bureaucracy. So I take it as that's part of doing business with those types of organizations. That being said, from a sales cycle perspective, I have found that there's a lot of different ways that you can show up and add value as a consultant. So you can work through, there's online resources that help partner you with organizations. So CBS is an example. I went through an online program called Catalant that helps match groups with specific consultants with very specific needs, but they do a lot of things in addition to identifying you to each other. They support payment plans. They also support insurance and things like that if you need. So that was something else that was newer to me, or it has been emerging, I would say, over the last decade, is that you can find different ways to engage as a single or solopreneur with a larger organization and still add a lot of value. You don't need to show up only as like a McKinsey or Accenture and be able to work with enterprise level clients.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. And I also saw you do keynote speaking.
I do. I do. So
How,
primarily,
yeah, how long have you been doing that?
well, speaking is something I've enjoyed. That was all the way back to junior high and high school. I was in speech and debate. So it's something that I have had the opportunity to practice quite a bit. I've gotten my reps in. And when I was at Target, I also enjoyed the opportunity, whether it was presenting or sharing a perspective. And when I launched my consultancy, I had to think about how do I show up and market this business? How do I connect and literally put my shingle out there and have a conversation with people about the support that I would offer and the value and impact I wanted to have? And there's a few different ways that you can do that and build that marketing approach. You can write, speak, have conversations like this one on podcasts and share your perspective. And I found for me, though I've done some writing, what I really lead into both as a personal interest, but professional impact, that found most ROI, both personally and professionally, was speaking. And that can be a few different things. So there's an opportunity to share intellectual property. So that's more of the keynote style speaking. but even facilitating conversations, having fireside chats, moderating panels gives me the opportunity to be able to formulate ideas or draw ideas out from a group and share those with an audience, which I find really rewarding. I do love that educational piece of the conversation that speaking and being comfortable on stages and screens allows me to have.
Okay. I mean, it makes sense because one of my next question would be, how'd you get so good? Because I saw some of the videos and I was like, wow, she's got an amazing stage presence. So I wasn't sure if it was like Toastmasters or some other type of practice practice group.
Well, that's very gracious. Thank you. Part of it is just the reps, and it's something I've been comfortable with now for decades. Not to say that I don't think preparation is incredibly important, and I certainly do prepare and have conversations. But step number one to becoming a speaker is telling people you want to be a speaker. You don't need any other qualifications besides that. But I think to answer the question that you're really asking is that I am also, in addition to being the head salesperson and the head of IT for my company, I'm also the head of professional development. And so every year I try to think through one key professional priority that I want to pursue. And a couple of years into the start of my business, I did think differently about how I wanted to show up with a stage presence. And I joined a cohort, a really fantastic speaking organization called Heroic Public Speaking that focuses on content development, but that also on stage presence, stage performance. And that's been a really fantastic organization. I'm happy to share that link if you want to put it in the show notes. And I took the time to really deepen my craft and make a shift from having speaking be something that I enjoyed and took the opportunity to doing to something that I could really think about as a way to build out my business from a marketing perspective and then also credibility and impact perspective. So it was with a fair amount of effort, but it certainly started with an interest that I like speaking. I liked it more than I liked writing, to be perfectly candid. So I naturally just leaned into that and that, as they say, is that. And I've continued to find ways to evolve how I get to show up on stages and screens. So that's also been fun as different parts of the industry have changed and podcasts, for example, become much more popular. These are really fun and engaging ways to have conversations with people like you and share with your audience on a variety of different topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple things too I wanted to touch on is you've got some topics here for your keynotes. And this one I wanted to delve in a little bit more, but it said supplier partnerships in parentheses dating for business. And I was thinking about that. That's such a great analogy because even in my world too, the 3PL world, it's not something you just jump into. There's like a little so getting to know each other, and then there's like it's like dating, right? As far as how is this relationship going to work? So can you expand about that topic more from your perspective?
Yeah, I absolutely will. So, like any good consultant, I like a good matrix and a framework for approaching any type of project or initiative. And the supplier partnerships or the dating for business concept is a pretty straightforward uh, approach to building out those partnerships. It starts with some self-reflection, and you'll hear some threads of what I've already talked about today. But self-reflection on your organization, your strategies, your priorities, you have to find the opportunities to share out those perspectives with your individual partners. You'll also need to assess the partners that you have. So, what is the health of your matrix? Where are things going very, very well? Where are they struggling? Where are they challenged? And how much you want to envision a new and improved future. And then, as you share out the strategies and priorities, it's also important to ask a lot of questions and open up a really mutual line of communication where you are sharing your perspectives, but you're asking for inputs, you're asking for feedback, and then you're also mapping out the future, being really transparent about where and how you want to grow. And so after you've started with the self-reflection, you've assessed your current partnerships, you've shared out and opened communication, then you will want to take a moment, whether it's quarterly or annually, to step back and reflect on how that plan is coming together, how it needs to be reevaluated. And then that brings you all the way back to self-reflection again. So then after you have those learnings, think back, what does my matrix look like? What are the supports and the priorities that I need to be really pursuing when it comes to the partnerships that I'm engaging with, and how do I want to continue to develop those partnerships or make new ones?
And also in your business too, like managing these relationships and these partnerships, I'm sure there's back and forth. And like you said,
Of
people, well,
course.
these are my needs and vice versa, right? Like how how challenging is that managing the expectations of a new relationship, maybe that doesn't new supplier vendor relationship that doesn't get off on the right foot, let's say.
Well, I the answer is going to be it depends. So I think something that's important when you think about your partnerships is that you've prioritized them in terms of what they are, what that partnership is bringing to the table. Is it an essential partnership? Is it a transactional partnership? And you're going to show up and right size the amount of care and import that you place on that partnership based on what it delivers for your organization. So it might not always be your largest partners, but if it's an essential partner, I would say that it makes sense to prioritize very, very quickly if you have some challenges with that partnership and kind of unwind, go back to the beginning and understand what's at the core of the challenges that you're dealing with and how do you want to either share additional information or expectations and goals to help get you back on track. And doing that, again, very quickly is of quite a bit of import. And I think it often will go back to reflecting on where are the gaps. So what do you need to share? But then also really what great questions do you need to ask? So there's some misalignment in how you thought you were showing up and how they are showing up. And the quicker you can understand what that is, the better. So sometimes that's sharing and providing direction, but many times it's often about asking great questions. So those are the things that I would start with if it's a pretty important player. So transactional vendor or partner, then it's more about setting clear expectations. It's less of a dialogue. Sometimes just by nature of how much time you have, you might not be able to spend that much time with all of your smaller, more transactional suppliers. So it's more about you being really clear about what your expectations are before a relationship might either be severed or elevated to the place where it's able to continue.
Okay. Another topic too is supplier vetting made easy.
Yes.
And especially dealing with the like you said, the Fortune 50 companies and whatnot that you deal with. Why do you think that's such a challenge for them in terms of vetting suppliers?
Well, I think the moment of reflection that I referenced a few minutes ago isn't always as deep or as comprehensive as it needs to be. I think that there are certain suppliers and partners that I've worked with who believe that they're very clear on what their expectations are and that they've laid them out and that those expectations have been aligned with strategic vision. And so naturally, anyone who is interested in working with them would clearly understand those. And that's often not the case. So the vetting made easy really starts with understanding your strategy, communicating it in a way that translates, literally translates, or even just from a business priorities perspective, translates to what's important to suppliers. And then also setting the expectations. So what are the expectations you have for your partners for the business growth, and where and how do you plan to partner with those key suppliers going forward? And then also making that moment to pause and ask questions, take in and check for understanding. And that's also a critical element of that supplier vetting made easy is that people often step over is not pausing to understand what and how your message has been received and what the gaps might be there. So I think sustainability expectations are a really good example of this, where you're hearing larger organizations say that their expectations are to deliver on X, Y, and Z, science-based target, but they haven't taken partners with their key suppliers to understand that XYZ isn't enabled unless you do these things first, and you haven't prioritized that. So you're seeing some massive initiatives that retailers or brands want to pursue, but their suppliers can't line up with them as quickly as they'd like because you haven't really checked for that understanding or gaps or barriers that exist. And then once you're able to do that, you're able to move much more quickly on the progress that you're expecting to see.
Okay. And another topic I saw that you're very passionate about and that you speak about is getting brands involved with the circular economy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a little bit more about the importance of that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The circular economy is something that I was learning about just as I was transitioning out of Target and into launching my own business. And something that I've struggled with just being a part of retail is that the key element of me doing my job well or supporting my clients and doing their work well is that we're really we're tasked with getting people to buy things and more things and more things that they might not need or things that might not be made as quite as sustainably as they could. And in my time at Target, I started to come up with a phrase around this feeling. I called it green guilt. And so when I launched my own business, I really thought about how do I help retailers and suppliers show up in a way where they can have a more positive impact on the environments where their products are made and where they're used and how these products are disposed of. And I really saw the circular economy as a framework that could help retailers and brands show up and understand what their priorities are, but importantly, map out what were the strategic elements of that plan and how to implement those plans. So I love what circularity is. It's not really about creating one giant circle of circular production and use. It's about closing waste loops and keeping resources at their highest use for longer. And it's incredibly flexible depending on your business model. So you can really size to fit the strategy based on what your business needs are, what your customer and client priorities are. So I found that retailers and brands respond to that really favorably.
Okay. Yeah. And it seems like it's gone over very well in terms of what you've
It,
been doing.
it's something that I really love. And again, just in a way to help retail move forward with more positive impact, it's essential when you look at the percent of resource use and greenhouse gas emissions that come from the production and use and disposal of consumer goods. It's an essential part of keeping the basically the globe on track for for a sustainable future. So I do want to play my part in that. It's not always the driving force of every client engagement, but where and as you're able to build circularity in and more holistic, sustainable approach in, I think it's a fantastic and essential way for retail and brands to be able to move forward in today's world.
Okay. And we're early on in 2024 right now.
Mhm.
What's next for you in your company?
What's next for me? Well, I am we're what 25 minutes into our conversation, and if you had AI as your your consultant, bingo, you just hit the jackpot because I am looking at ways to think about how AI can be incorporated into some of the offerings that I have for my clients. I do a lot of Excel and financial modeling, and you're starting to see how AI can help support that part of the business model in really exciting ways. It's AI is also becoming more integrated into RFP and negotiation processes to help really focus on ultimately driving the solutions that have the most impact and value. And I think those are probably the two biggest things that I'm looking at. I do have a couple of international clients that I'm looking to expand outside of the US footprint that I've built over the last half dozen years as well. So that's also been fun to look and understand how markets shift when you go across borders and oceans.
Okay. And if people want to get a hold of you to learn more, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll link it in the notes, but I'm active on LinkedIn. I post there regularly. So Juli Lassow, I'm the only one that's there. Or JHL-Solutions is my website, and you're easily able to go there to see where conversations like this will be housed, as well as the other ways that I like to be able to show up and provide support and value for my clients. So I would encourage anyone to reach out in either of those two places. They'll be able to get a hold of me quite easily, and I'm happy to connect and chat more of all things retail
Excellent.
and
Excellent.
entrepreneurship and everything else we've discussed today.
Yep. And we'll link those in the show notes, and yeah, people can get in touch. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Julie. That's all the time we have for now, and we will see you next time.